Again, I want to thank that great set of panelists. And as they leave the stage, it's really my honor to introduce our first keynote speaker for the day, Professor Paul Monks. Paul is the Chief Scientific Advisor in the United Kingdom's Department of Energy Security Net Zero. So, Paul, I think you win the award for the longest commute to Davis, but there might be someone who might have beat you. But in your role, Paul delivers really independent and impartial scientific advice to ministers, policymakers across the energy security and net zero portfolio, as well as advice on the role that science plays in addressing sustainability and the challenges to deliver decarbonization, not only in the United Kingdom, but around the world. Just prior to this role, and this is actually when Paul and I met last October in Tokyo, he was Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department of Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy, and before that, the Pro Vice Chancellor and the head of the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Leicester, where he remains a professor. Paul has and continues to chair major global efforts in fields related to atmospheric chemistry, as well as satellite-based Earth observation, including efforts to connect academia with industry. Paul, I think the team has your presentation keyed up, so stage is yours. And there's a clicker here for you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction and for inviting me here to talk today to you. You notice that I've changed departments, and that was actually my last international trip. I was after my last international trip. I woke up in the middle of the night to find that the department had changed on me, which is quite an unusual sort of thing. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about charting the path to energy security and a net zero economy. I'm going to, at Chad's sort of imposition, I'm going to kind of give two parts of this talk. I'm going to talk about net zero and innovation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing in the UK around our innovation ecosystem quite recently. Chad has told you this. You might not be familiar with what a chief scientific advisor is within government. We sit in government departments. We're members mainly of academia who are actually full-time civil servants for the period of our tenure, where we deliver that science and engineering advice in an impartial and independent way. I'll just kind of give you a flavour of the sort of things I kind of get up to. This is a bit of my photo gallery of some of the places that I've been. I'm very, very lucky. I get to kind of trips all the way around the UK and the globe, finding out about exciting science and engineering that is going on and being able to translate that into government, and particularly to make sure that government policy is underpinned by the best understanding of that science and engineering. So, to net zero. There is probably no greater global challenge that we face than that of decarbonising our economies. The IPCC 6th AR report came out last week. The synthesis said, we're not going to make 1.5 degrees. Frankly, that's what it said. We're going to face widespread implications from a changing climate. We're going to need to adapt to that changing climate, and we're also going to need to mitigate to the challenge that faces. It's a very, very stark situation that we face. The science is unequivocal about where we are on climate change. So we as a global community have to act together. And I'm going to give you the view that what we're doing in the UK, and I'm not going to say it's the right way of doing it. One of the things that you learn is that we need sustainable, resilient, and measurable paths to net zero, and those paths actually have to be individually and right for the countries that are doing them. So I'm just going to give you an overview, if you will, of the UK way of doing that, and you can maybe draw some lessons from that. People often say to me, is the government committed to net zero? And I said, well, actually, it's legislated into law. So for us, in 2019, we re-legislated to increase our ambition to reach net zero by 2050. We have a base year of 1990. That means we have to reduce our emissions by 100% compared to 1990 levels by 2050. We do this through a piece of legislation, the Climate Change Act. Within that, we set 5-year budgets, the so-called carbon budgets, the last of which we set in June 2021, which was the 6th carbon budget that comes out in the mid-2030s, 2035. That feeds up into the international global situation, nationally determined contributions as part of the Paris Agreement, and we set our ambition at 78% in carbon budget 6 by the mid-2030s as part of the Paris Agreement. So that's our framework. The way that we tend to think of net zero very heavily is around the way that we can achieve our carbon budgets. And carbon budget bit 6, as I said, emissions by 78%. What it's going to mean is we're going to need considerable growth of low carbon energy supplies. really an increase in low carbon solutions. We're going to have to decrease our carbon intensity, more of that later, as well as that tricky one. I think while I'm in Dave, it's actually a good place to talk about this. How the hell do you transform agriculture? You just can't stop cows producing methane. So how do you transform agriculture and land use as part of that? If we think about the routes to net zero, and as I said, I strongly believe that you've got to think about what is sustainable for a country, what is resilient in terms of the pathways that you take, and I think measurable and making it real for people is important as well. One area that people tend to forget, at the top two of this, or two areas that people tend to forget, is we need to reduce demand and increase efficiency. It's much easier not to have to create energy or electricity or whatever in the first place, if you can reduce demand. Increase efficiency, designed to recycle, things like that. How can we improve the efficiency in the way that we use energy, often forgotten around this? We are going to need a plethora of low-carbon solutions. Electrification is going to become big. Hydrogen, I'll talk a little bit about. Carbon capture, utilization and storage. At the moment, we're really at CCS. We're not really at the utilization piece. Low-carbon energy, nuclear, and things like that, as well as the areas of land use. On the right-hand side is just a pathway to net zero. It's taken from the Climate Change Committee. That's an independent committee in the UK that holds government to account. And every year, we have an annual exchange of letters. They say you're not doing enough. We write back saying, we've got some really good ideas about what we're going to do in order to achieve these goals. That sort of thing, except it's quasi-judicial, which kind of makes it slightly harder than that. So that's the way that we look at that. So how do we set that out? We have a series of strategies. Some of them have appeared and some of them haven't. Through that, we set a net zero strategy around the COP26 process. We've just put out the British Energy Security Strategy as part of that. We have a series of delivery plans. As I say, we report on those annually as part of that. And we go across the whole of the different sectors: transport, industry, hydrogen, finance. And I'll get back to finance, which is an important part of this as well. I used to joke when I first joined the department, we were DFS, which in England means it's a sofa company, but actually it's a department for strategies as well. So the joke doesn't really translate very well, does it? But so to the challenge that we face, and Deborah talked a little bit about this early on around this question of a systems challenge. So this is the energy transition that I've writ large here. And what you can see on the left-hand side are the energy sources: gas, electricity, oil and petrol. On the right-hand side, the usage sectors: industry, land, water. Nope, you're looking at this and going, oh my goodness, there's a lot of lines on this. So this is a systems diagram. So we've got a systems problem here. And actually, systems problems, governments are not good at systems problems, by the way, generally speaking. They're quite hard because there's too many interrelationships in there. And it leads to systems torpor. But we've got a systems problem. That's great. But actually, it's worse than that, because we've got a system of systems problem, because actually we need finance to drive that. So we've got a system of systems problem. If you take solely a technocratic view of that, and that the transition of decarbonisation is just about technology, you'll get it wrong. We've heard very, very clearly this morning, it's about people. So actually we've got consumer behaviour and behaviour change. So it's a system of systems problem. But it's actually slightly worse than that, because I take that in a UK-centric view. That sits within the global energy transition. And we've heard a lot about this morning about how we view this problem in the global context, as well as the global economic transition. There's global finance and global finance flows that go into this. So really, we've got a system of systems problem. Now, that's getting quite systemy. But I think actually recognizing that you've got a systems problem and you're dealing with a systems problem is actually really important. And we've now brought in tools in government, so we have systems maps. We understand when we're taking those changes, where are the easy and the critical paths within that. But you've got to have a systems approach to understanding decarbonisation. And I would challenge this audience to think about competitiveness, that you've got to take a systems approach to competitiveness as well. There is no golden bullet in this. It's multiple small changes that make the system better and more optimised. It's an economy-wide transformation that we're going to require across that. And I think when we think about net zero, what we're challenging ourselves actually in the UK government to think about everything that we do through the lens of a net zero. It is across our transport, our industry, our power, our land use, our buildings. Some of the things haven't come out, but let's not worry about it. And also recognising we need negative emission technologies and greenhouse gas removals to be that net zero piece. So we're going to require that economy-wide transformation as part of achieving net zero. Just to re-emphasize a point I made earlier, we used to call this behavioral change. The current political class has a little bit of a problem with behavioral change because it's asking people to do stuff or telling them to do stuff. So we now call it green choices. The choice is yours. It's all about choice. Around that. So we recognise that 44% of the emission savings that we're going to need to make are actually about the public making green choices. So again, if you take that technological view of the transition to net zero, that somehow technology is going to come riding over the horizon to save you all, it's not. People use technology. I mean, if you look at, I was standing outside the airport in San Francisco, and there wasn't a yellow cab to be seen in sight. It's all Lyft and Uber. Why? Because actually consumer choice has driven that, those effective digitalization and transactional nature of now the cab business means that you get Lyft and Uber everywhere. Other cab companies are available, I believe. But that's the point. That's about a choice. And actually, I think a challenge for many of us is making the green choice the obvious choice. And that's a challenge that we face. And there's money to be made in this. There's money to be made in this for the people who get it right. So I think there's green choices around low carbon technologies. We're going to go bigly. We have banned the sale of the internal combustion engine after 2030, the hybrid after 2035 in Europe. That's going to force big changes. We're going to phase out gas heating, which you probably don't have a lot of in the US, as part of that as well. That will change will change the market. We're going to use energy technologies. We've now brought in legislation to make it easier for people to be able to get their appliances fixed around that, and also everyday consumer choices. So I think it's important just to recognise that that consumer choice and green choices are an important part of this. So let's just go to the energy transition very briefly, and then I'll finish with some innovation. This is what the energy demand for the UK looks like over the last decade to about 2020. What you can see in this is goodbye coal. We have now 3 coal-fired power stations left in the UK, and if it wasn't for Putin's illegal war in the Ukraine, we would have had none. We've had to keep them because of that. You can see a massive growth in renewables, wind, and strangely for a country where it rains a lot, solar as well as nuclear, which we've had as a base load of about 20% of our power for that period of time. You will see that what we've replaced it much with is natural gas. And of course, I could talk for ages about natural gas. Natural gas is the most brilliant piece of commercial branding ever. You think about it, natural gas. What a brilliant piece of branding. If there ever was one. Anyway, let's get past that. So in some senses, you could see that sort of change. If we move to the future, this doesn't look like the future. This is the total energy that the UK uses on any single day. And the reason I want to just go through this, at the bottom here, in the thick red line, is actually the amount of electricity. And this the amount of energy that we use in liquid fuels. Yeah? The blue line here is the amount of gas that we use, and as I said, we use a lot of gas in heating. And you can see, why am I showing you this graph? Because if you think about the future, most of this we're going to have to turn into electricity. We're going to have electric vehicles. We're going to have electric heating. So actually, there's a real challenge for us. We're going to have to produce 7,000 gigawatt hours per day of low carbon energy. And that's a real challenge in order to do that. So we would think about the total system. Again, it's a systems problem of the total amount of energy that we use. So actually, if you look at the UK energy consumption, only 17% is electricity. 40% is in transport, 43% is in electricity. And that means for us, by the time we reach 2050, we're going to double the amount of generation. We're going to go from about 300 terawatt hours a day to 700 terawatt hours. And that's got to be low carbon. That's the scale of the challenge. Now, I was talking to a chap at my table. These are actually big, scary numbers. Terawatts is a lot of energy. I often struggle at these sort of things. People go, yes, that they're numbers. That is a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy in a system that has a lot of renewables in it. Renewables are by their nature variable or intermittent, depending on which phrase you like. Around that puts an extra challenge that we need to store energy at scale in order to have a really different system to the one that we have at the moment. And that's a real challenge around that system of the future. So the journey to net zero for us looks a little bit like this. This is just taken from our strategies. On the left-hand side here are the energy sources and the end uses of the day, oil and natural gas being a very strong one. On the right-hand side, you can see one of the scenarios of 2050 in our strategies. You see very strongly the renewables up there at the top, wind, nuclear because it's low carbon, biomass in the middle. You can still see, though, in this scenario, we're still using a lot of fossil fuels, but they're mainly abated. And there's a real interesting question about, I often get shouted at by environmentalists when I give this talk. They go, but we must get rid of all fossil fuel. I said, yes, but do you want your lights on or not? That's the question. How are we going to abate those fossil fuels? We've just announced this week, we will announce, actually, I should tell you this, but we will announce big investments in CCS in the UK because we recognise that abated fossil fuels have got to be part of that mix. Because when you look at energy systems, it's about resilience, and resilience of those energy systems are important. So to one of your themes, very briefly, I've got about 4 more minutes, have I, to do this. What does research and innovation for net zero really look like? So we look at the technologies that we're going to need. If we look to 2030, we've got most of them. It's actually just about deploying them at scale. If we look towards 2050, we've got about 50% of the technologies that we need already in the market. We've got 50% of the technologies in the development, and we know what they are. They are the hard to decarbonize sectors, concrete, large-scale energy storage, and some of those sort of things. So actually, you've got to do that, but you've got to have the business models, financing. We tend to think in regulatory frameworks. That's a very kind of European way of doing it. Regulatory frameworks are for us a tool and a friend. For you, they're a barrier and a blocker, but we'll pass that by. But actually, we think that's a way to be able to position the market. So we've actually written down a research and innovation framework for net zero. We're about to put down a delivery plan. You will not surprise you to hear it's a systems problem. So what we're looking at there is an integrated approach. We're looking at the technologies and the usage sectors, but we also recognize there are really 5 key enablers for that. And actually, they will chime with some of the themes that we've been talking about this morning. Digital is not just about decarbonizing computers. Data flows and interoperability of those data flows can be a really important tool for decarbonisation in the way that we use energy. It's about finance and making sure that we've got the money deployed in order to do this. It's making sure that policy aligns with and makes innovation natural choice. We have tax credits in the UK around making sure that innovative companies get a tax break. It's making sure that we've got the skills. I mean, it is actually, I have a joke on a Monday morning, actually. I play buzzword bingo. And the question is the person that says skills or hydrogen to me on a Monday morning. So I've actually done it to myself this week. But skills is incredibly important. But also making sure that is underpinned by engaged citizens and those sustainable choices. They're the 5 key things that enable this innovation ecosystem here in order to deliver for net zero, the technologies that we need and the choices that we have to make. So I'm just going to, for the last couple of minutes, just go out a little bit and talk. I've talked a little bit about net zero. I've talked about the challenges that we face there and the role that innovation can play there. I wanted to talk a little bit about the UK research and innovation ecosystem and see whether there's any parallels for some of the things that we've learned about this. So we actually, as I was talking at the beginning, I changed department, or the department changed on me. We split the old department that I was in into 3. And actually, one of the departments that we formed is a new department for science, innovation and technology in the UK. And that's quite an important signal, I think, and actually chimes with some of the things that you'd be saying in this room about saying we have now a Secretary of State, a cabinet minister in the cabinet whose job it is to talk for science and innovation because we think it's that important. So that's something that we've just done, and it brings all the science and innovation and much of science and innovation funding under a single department. This is what our ecosystem looks like in the UK, and I don't expect you to, and I'm not going to try and describe it to you, but the important thing, and again, you've said this morning, we see very much about bringing the public finance alongside private finance. They're the two sort of things. We have a GDP goal. It's 2.4% of GDP by 2025. Actually, we've just exceeded, that's the OECD average at the moment. I think it will reach about 3% actually by that sort of stage, and we're heading towards that to put the public and the private finance side by side. I think always the question, and the question I will kind of leave you with, is what diversity of an ecosystem do you need in order to deliver the public good and outcomes that public funding should do, but also a healthy research and innovation ecosystem that allows you to be resilient for tomorrow. This is the forever challenge of this sort of area. So we have a very complex ecosystem of universities and businesses that work together, alongside publicly funded laboratories and national academies. And that's the way it should be, because actually, if you know about ecosystems, ecosystems give you diversity and they give you resilience to change, and that's an important thing. And when I joined government, what government wants to do is it wants command and control. That's the way that it does it. Where I say to people, I've long given up on having a rational science system. I don't want a rational science system because actually it doesn't really do much good. You want that. And I think that's one of the key tensions. So we have set, just in the last 2 weeks, a national strategy for science and technology that, like Deborah was talking about, federal. So we now have one. It's called the Science and Technology Framework. It used to be called the 10 Big Things. They're all stunningly obvious, as with any good strategy, around there. But also it talks to some of the things that you've been hinting at today. We're looking at critical technologies. We're looking at the concept of strategic technology advantage. We're looking at who our friends are not, making sure that we have resilience. I've learned a new phrase recently, friend shoring, where you work along people. We want critical technologies, strengths, investing in R&D, talent, business, using government's buying power, taking international opportunities. We put an international science and technology strategy out just the other day. Give the researchers the best physical and digital environments, regulate new tech to keep us safe. We love regulation. And innovate the public sector to improve services. So they're the sort of things that we're now trying to do from a government point of view as a top-down. And just the 5 critical technologies that we've identified, and you already name-checked most of these: AI, engineering and biology, future telecom, 6G, semiconductors. Oh, that's a nasty old problem. That is a really nasty problem. And quantum technologies, which are amazing and will change the way that the world works. Quantum computing, first fault-tolerant quantum computer will change the way the world works, in my view. You can't have any other opinion. So we've identified those, and we're using these, and they're actually, in reality, all platform technologies. They're platform technologies that will help grow the markets, but also grow science and innovation endeavour. But I think it finally comes down to this question of what is the balance between that top-down and bottom-up approach. It's not the upstairs, downstairs. How do you have a healthy enough ecosystem? If the pandemic taught us anything, it taught us we had the ability to take our science and innovation base and tilt it very quickly to support the science and engineering that we needed to respond to the pandemic. We had, on record time, we had vaccines out of our systems in a way, of platform technologies, actually in mRNA and also in the Oxford AstraZeneca virus, which had been a platform technology for dealing with Ebola and like. And actually, there's all this diagram, which you can't probably see. We want many, many different things out of our science ecosystem. And this is the challenge that we often have. We want it to create jobs. We want it to create security. We want it to create economic growth. We want it to create a stable environment. Recognize that you are and you do want all those things, and have that right tensioning between the top down and the bottom up as you build your innovation ecosystem. We just, to finish off, we have just launched, we copied you, this is a great thing, we just launched the Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, ARIA. It's an invention agency, which is quite different for us. It's very much saying we don't have anything in our ecosystem that's like ARPA, and ARPA is actually really quite good. 60 years after you did it, we've managed to catch up, but hey-ho, around that. Interestingly, the first CEO, Ilan Gur, actually we recruited from the US system for that. And though its funding is actually quite moderate over this period, the idea is really to operate with that minimal bureaucracy, champion scientific freedom, and may maintain a high tolerance for risk and failure. There's an interesting question why we can't do that in the rest of our system. We have to set up a new agency to do that, which tells you more, I think, about public funding than I probably should say in public. But we now have that, and I think it's saying we need even more diversity in our research and innovation ecosystem to meet the demands of a changing geopolitical and global situation, and the strategic technology advantage that innovation brings in this sort of area. So thank you very much for listening to me this morning. Hopefully that was interesting. Some take-home messages I would say for you. There's a significant challenge presented by net zero that's pervasive through everything that we do. You really need a systems approach to treating many of these problems, and you need to incorporate people and green choices in that. and significant R&D and economic opportunities are offered for the transition to net zero and through technology for the future. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. All right.
So, Paul, I just want to, first of all, I'm glad we friend-shored you. You just mentioned in closing the UK friend-shored Elon Gurr from California. And actually, Deborah and I had the opportunity to see Elon a few weeks ago when we were in the UK. And but we might just keep you and Jenny here. We might not let you go back to the UK. But I think there were many reasons, Paul, that we're grateful for you spending time with us today and coming here. One, of course, the deep knowledge and insights that we're going to dive deeper on this upcoming panel around sustainability, decarbonization, net zero goals. But also, you get back to a point Deborah made earlier today. You provide a foil. In looking at the UK system, I think it actually shines a light on some of the challenges and opportunities we have even in the US, but even more deeply, the opportunities for collaboration and partnership. So thanks for being with us, Paul.